Imagine a world lit only by firelight and fear. A world where justice was not a right but, a privilege. In the Middle Ages, the very word prison whispered a tale of dread. It was not merely a place of confinement, it was a descent into a living nightmare. These were places where hope went to die. Where the sun was a distant memory, and the only certainty was suffering. For most, to be sent to a medieval prison was to be erased from the world of the living, long before death claimed you. The stories of these places are not just history. They are warnings, etched in cold stone. The fear was primal. It was born from the unknown. What happened behind those thick, unforgiving walls? Rumors spread like wildfire through the muddy streets of medieval towns. Tales of starvation, tales of disease, tales of unspeakable tortures designed to break the body and the soul. These were not correctional facilities. There was no concept of rehabilitation. A prison was a holding pen, a place to await a verdict, a punishment, or often, a slow and agonizing end. The architecture itself was a statement of power. Towers that scraped the sky, dungeons that burrowed into the earth. On the north bank of the River Thames in London, a fortress stands. It is known as the Tower of London. For nearly 1,000 years it has been a silent witness to history. It has been a royal palace. It has been a treasury. It has been an armory. But its most infamous role was that of a prison. This was no ordinary jail. This was where the enemies of the crown were sent. Kings have known the cold embrace of its stone walls. Queens have known the cold embrace of its stone walls. Princes have known the cold embrace of its stone walls. Scholars have known the cold embrace of its stone walls. The tower was not just a building, it was a symbol of the monarch's ultimate power over life and death. Its construction began with William the Conqueror in the 11th century. He built the central White Tower to dominate and intimidate the recently conquered city of London. Over the centuries, more towers and walls were added, creating a complex, formidable fortress. Its location on the river was strategic. Prisoners could be brought in secretly through the Traitor's Gate, avoiding the public eye and any chance of rescue. The ominous name of this Watergate sent a shiver down the spine of any who passed through it. To enter the tower as a prisoner was to know that your fate was sealed. Life within the tower varied greatly depending on who you were. In the heart of Venice, a city built on water, stands a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, the Doge's Palace, seat of government, hall of justice, home of the leader of the Venetian Republic. With its pink and white marble facade, it seems a place of beauty and light. But hidden within its splendor, connected by that famous bridge, was one of the most feared prisons in Europe. Piombi, the Leads, attic cells under the lead-lined roof, a place of extreme, unrelenting misery. Being directly under the lead roof meant they became ovens in the sweltering Venetian summers. The heat was unbearable, baking the prisoners day and night. In the winter, the lead plates offered no insulation. The cold was biting and damp, seeping into the bones of the unfortunate souls trapped within. This was a prison of extreme temperatures, designed to break a person's will through constant physical torment. The cells were small, a few feet square, with low ceilings that often prevented a person from even standing up straight. Below the Piombi were even worse cells, the Pozzi, the wells. These were dungeons at the water level of the canals, perpetually dark, damp, infested with rats and other vermin. The tide would often rise, flooding the floors with foul-smelling canal water, leaving the prisoners to stand in knee-deep filth for hours. The psychological effect of being trapped in cold, wet darkness, with the constant sound of lapping water and the stench of decay, is hard to imagine. In the center of medieval Paris, on the right bank of the Seine, stood a fortress known as the Grand Châtelet. Originally built to defend a bridge, it evolved into the headquarters of the city's provost, the chief magistrate. It was the center of law and order in Paris, and it contained one of the most notorious and dreaded prisons in all of France. Le Châtelet was not for kings or nobles, it was a prison for the common people. Its reputation for cruelty and squalor was legendary. The poor and the powerless simply disappeared here. The prison was a chaotic, overcrowded labyrinth, cells, dungeons, torture chambers. It was divided by a prisoner's ability to pay. Those with a little money could get upper cells, chambres à pistoles, straw mattress, and a bit of light. But most with nothing were sent to the lower dungeons, subterranean pits with terrible names. The Pit, the Gourd, Fin d'Oise. One terrifying cell was the Fosse, an oubliette, a bottle-shaped pit, prisoners lowered by a rope, a conical floor sloping to a central grate. In the Loire Valley of France stands the Château de Loches. It is a massive castle, a royal residence. It really looms over the town below, but beneath its regal exterior, within its imposing keep, lies one of the most sinister prisons of the Middle Ages. King Louis XI ruled in the late 15th century. A cunning, paranoid monarch, he was known as the Universal Spider. He wove complex webs of political intrigue. At the center of his web was the dungeon of Loches, where he kept his most dangerous political enemies. Louis perfected psychological torture. He favored imprisonment over execution. He is credited with designing special iron cages for his prisoners. These cages, called fillets or little daughters, were small, cramped, and hung from the dungeon ceilings. They were just big enough for a person to sit or to crouch, but not to stand up or to lie down fully. Prisoners could be kept in these cages for years, their muscles atrophying, their minds slowly unraveling from confinement and isolation. One of the most famous prisoners was Cardinal Jean Labalue. A trusted advisor to Louis, he fell from grace after being accused of treason. What was it truly like to be a prisoner in the Middle Ages? Well, honestly, the experience was a brutal assault on all the senses. The first thing that would strike you was the smell. It was a thick, gagging stench of unwashed bodies. Human waste, sickness, decay, sanitation was non-existent. Prisoners relieved themselves in the corners, or in communal buckets that were emptied infrequently, if at all. This filth was a breeding ground for lice, fleas, rats. The air itself felt heavy and poisonous. Then there was the darkness. For those in the lower dungeons, sunlight was a forgotten luxury. Their world was one of perpetual twilight, or absolute blackness. This lack of light was disorienting and deeply depressing. It warped the sense of time, making days and nights blur into one endless period of suffering. Hunger was a constant gnawing pain. Food, if it came at all, was meager and foul. A typical ration might be a small piece of hard, moldy bread and a cup of stagnant water. The social environment was just as dangerous as the physical one. Cells were often brutally overcrowded. Medieval prisons were not just places of confinement, they were theaters of pain. Torture was an officially sanctioned part of the justice system. It was used for several purposes: to extract confessions, to obtain the names of accomplices, or simply as a form of punishment in itself. The belief was that pain could purify the soul and reveal the truth. In reality, it was a brutal method of coercion that led to countless false confessions from people willing to say anything to make the agony stop. The dungeons of castles and prisons across Europe were equipped with a terrifying array of devices designed for this purpose. One of the most infamous instruments was the rack. This was a wooden frame with rollers at each end. The prisoner's hands and feet were tied to the rollers. The rollers were then slowly turned. The device would stretch the victim's body, pulling their limbs from their sockets. The sound of popping joints and tearing ligaments was accompanied by excruciating pain. The strappado was another common method. The prisoner's hands were tied behind their back. The rope was slung over a beam. They would then be hoisted into the air, dislocating their shoulders. Sometimes weights were added to their feet to increase the agony. Lesser-known but equally horrific devices were also used. The thumbscrew was a vice used to crush the thumbs. The thumbscrew could also crush fingers. The thumbscrew could crush toes, or strapping them down while water was dripped slowly onto their forehead for days. Not all stories that come from medieval and early modern prisons are tales of despair. Some are legends of incredible courage and ingenuity. Perhaps the most famous escape story of all is that of Giacomo Casanova, the legendary Venetian adventurer, writer, lover. He was arrested in 1755. He was accused of public outrages against religion and common decency by the secretive Venetian Inquisition. Without a trial, he was sentenced to 5 years. In the most secure section of the Doge's palace prison, the dreaded Piombi, the lead-roofed cells from which no one had ever escaped, Casanova was placed in a hot cell, flea-infested cell under the lead roof. But his spirit was not easily broken. A man of action, a man of intellect, he immediately began to plot his escape. On the night of October 31st, 1756, more than a year after imprisonment, they made their move. They climbed through a hole onto the steep, lead-plated roof. Moonlight guided them across the treacherous surface, and out into St. Mark's Square. It was a singular triumph of human will against the crushing power of the state. When we look back at these medieval prisons, we are looking into a mirror of a bygone world. Dark, damp, cruel places. They reveal a world where the concept of justice was fundamentally different from our own. Justice was not blind. Power, status, wealth. The law was a tool to be used by the powerful to maintain control. For the vast majority there was little recourse, and the presumption of innocence was a concept for a distant future. The architecture of these prisons speaks volumes: towering fortresses, subterranean dungeons. They were designed not to reform, but to crush, to remove a person from society and from memory. Torture, starvation, filth, the physical body was seen as separate from the soul. Pain was believed to be a path to truth, and suffering was a penance for sin. The prisoners' humanity was secondary to their alleged crime, and their life had little value once they were behind stone walls. And yet, even in the deepest darkness, we find sparks of the human spirit. The carvings on the dungeon walls at Audacious, the audacious escape of Casanova. They stand as silent stone monuments, warning us of the dangers of unchecked power, and reminding us to cherish the rights and freedoms that so many before us never knew.